They shared a shelter in the cold. He didn't know he was now her mate by sacred law. The wind howled through the narrow, snow-covered road, carrying icy shards that bit at anyone who dared to be outside. Amara hugged her coat tighter, her teeth chattering despite the thick wool wrapped around her. She had been driving for hours, trying to get back home after visiting her cousin in a neighboring town. The snowstorm had caught her off guard, turning the familiar roads into a treacherous maze of white. Visibility was nearly zero, and her car struggled over the slippery patches of ice that had formed in the shadows of the towering pines. It had started as a light snow, almost charming, dusting the trees and the roadside like sugar. But within an hour, it had transformed into a blizzard, whipping across the hills with relentless force. Amara had slowed her car to a crawl, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were pale. Her phone's battery was low, and the signal was patchy at best. Panic rose in her chest when she realized she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Then, without warning, her car hit a slick patch and skidded, sliding sideways before coming to a rest against a mound of snow. Her heart raced, and for a moment she sat frozen, staring at the swirling white around her. She tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't budge. The engine coughed and died, leaving her in complete silence except for the roar of the wind outside. She realized she had no choice but to find shelter or risk freezing in the night. Pulling her scarf tighter around her face, she stepped out of the car. The cold hit her like a wall, biting at any exposed skin. Her boots sank into the deep snow as she trudged forward, hoping to find a building, a cabin, anything. But the road was empty, and the thick forest loomed on both sides, dark and foreboding. As she moved slowly, her eyes caught a faint outline near the edge of the trees, a small wooden shed, half hidden by snow and leaning slightly to one side. Relief surged through her. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. She hurried toward it, her legs burning from the effort of moving through the snow. As she approached, she noticed that someone was already inside. At first, she froze. A man sat in the corner, wrapped in a thick coat, his back against the wall. He looked up at her with cautious eyes, and she could see the surprise there mirrored on her own face. She hesitated, unsure whether to retreat, but the cold pressed against her like a living thing, and there was no other option. I don't want to intrude," she said, her voice trembling from the cold and nerves. The man shook his head slightly, motioning toward the empty space near him. "It's okay. There's enough room. Come in." Amara stepped inside, and the warmth, or at least the relief from the wind, immediately wrapped around her. The shed smelled of wood and earth, slightly damp from the snow melting against the walls. The man's presence was quiet but commanding. He didn't offer a hand, but she felt a strange sense of safety simply from sharing the space. They settled into opposite corners of the shed, both aware of the other's presence but hesitant to speak at first. The snowstorm outside continued unabated, rattling the shed's walls and creating an almost magical sense of isolation. Amara's mind raced with questions about who he was, why he was out here, and whether she could trust him. The man, whose name she would later learn was Elias, seemed calm and composed, as if he had faced such nights before. After a few minutes of tense silence, Amara broke it. I didn't expect to find anyone else out here," she said, trying to sound casual. Elias gave a small, wry smile. "Neither did I, but I guess the snow has a way of bringing people together." Her lips twitched into a faint smile, though she didn't feel much humor in the situation. They began to talk in small, careful sentences, learning each other's names and the barest details of their lives. Amara mentioned her family, how she had been visiting her cousin, and her fear of being stuck out in the cold. Elias spoke less at first, giving only short answers, but she sensed a quiet strength in him, a sense that he knew how to endure difficult situations without panicking. As the night went on, the snow piled higher, and the temperature dropped even further. Amara and Elias huddled closer to the center of the shed, trying to share body warmth without violating personal space. The cramped conditions forced them into an unspoken partnership. Elias helped Amara find a dry corner of the shed to sit on, while she offered him some of the snacks she had in her bag. Small gestures of kindness began to break the initial barriers of caution and uncertainty. At one point, Amara noticed that Elias was shivering slightly, though he tried to hide it. Without thinking, she handed him her scarf. "Here, take this. You'll need it more than I do." He hesitated, then accepted it with a nod. "Thank you, that's thoughtful of you." The words were simple, but the tone carried weight. For the first time, Amara felt a subtle warmth that wasn't just from the shared body heat. She realized that in moments of extreme vulnerability, human connections could form faster and more deeply than in ordinary life. They talked about ordinary things too, childhood memories, favorite books, and even the little quirks of their personalities. Amara found herself laughing softly at some of Elia's dry humor, and he, in turn, relaxed as he realized she was genuinely kind and intelligent. The conversation created a fragile but undeniable bond, a feeling of trust that neither had expected to find in the middle of a snowstorm. Hours passed, though time felt strange in the shelter. The storm continued to rage outside, making the small space feel both safe and confining. As exhaustion began to creep in, they fell into a companionable silence, listening to the wind howl and the occasional drip of melting snow from the shed's roof. Amara felt a flicker of gratitude toward this stranger who had become her temporary guardian in the cold. Before sleep claimed them, Amara thought about the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. She had entered the shed thinking she would face the night alone, fearful and cold. Instead, she found someone who shared her struggle, someone whose presence made the freezing night slightly more bearable. And though she didn't yet understand the deeper connection that awaited them, she felt a sense of comfort she couldn't explain, a quiet, unspoken bond forming in the harshest conditions. As the night deepened, Elias kept a watchful eye on the small opening of the shed. Neither spoke much after that, but both felt the unspoken agreement. They would protect each other until morning. And in that shared silence, with the snowstorm howling outside and the cold pressing in from every side, a story was quietly beginning, one that neither of them could have predicted, yet one that would change their lives forever. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the sky with pale light, the storm had lessened. They were both tired, cold, but alive. And though they didn't know it yet, the bond formed in that small, icy shelter would become the foundation of something far greater than either had imagined. The morning sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds, casting a pale, gray light over the snow-covered landscape. Amara rubbed her arms, feeling the lingering cold seep through her coat. The night in the shed had been harsh, but she had survived. More than that, she had survived with someone else by her side, Elias. She still didn't know much about him, and yet in the brief hours they had shared, a strange sense of trust had grown between them. Elias stirred beside her, stretching slightly and adjusting his coat. He had slept lightly, always alert to the sounds of the storm outside. When he saw Amara awake, he gave a small, almost shy nod. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "Are you all right?" Amara smiled faintly. "I think so, cold but alive." She looked out of the small shed opening and shivered as the wind brushed against her face. "And you?" "I'm fine," he replied, though she could see the slight tension in his shoulders. He was a man who did not easily show weakness, but the night had tested even him. They began to pack their few belongings, the silence now less tense than before. The shared experience of the storm had created a bond they both acknowledged, but didn't need to speak aloud. Amara offered Elias some of the water she had saved, and he accepted it with a nod of gratitude. The simple gestures carried weight now, each small act of care deepening their connection. As they stepped out of the shed, the world seemed almost magical. Snow covered every branch, every fence, turning the forest and road into a winter wonderland. It was beautiful, but the air was still bitter, and their breaths came in visible clouds. Amara felt a mix of awe and relief, relief that they had survived, awe at the quiet power of nature that could be both harsh and stunning. "We should find a place to get help," Elias said. "The storm might be easing, but the roads could still be dangerous." Amara nodded. "I know a town a few miles from here. If we keep moving carefully, we might reach it by midday." They set off together, their steps crunching in the snow. At first, conversation was sparse, each absorbed in the effort to navigate the slippery terrain. But gradually the words returned, and with them a sense of familiarity. They spoke of ordinary things, childhood memories, favorite meals, the simple pleasures they often overlooked. Amara discovered that Elias had grown up traveling from place to place with his family. His life had been shaped by survival, learning to adapt to harsh conditions and unexpected challenges. She listened, fascinated, as he spoke of forests, rivers, and mountains he had crossed alone. There was a calmness in his stories, a quiet confidence that came from experience. Amara felt drawn to that strength, admiring the way he faced danger without panic. In turn, Elias was intrigued by Amara's warmth and curiosity. She spoke with sincerity, without exaggeration or pretense, and he found it refreshing. Her laughter, soft but genuine, reminded him of moments he had long forgotten, times when life had been simpler, less complicated by responsibility and danger. Despite the snow and exhaustion, he felt lighter in her presence. By late morning, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. Relief flooded through them. A small village lay beyond the hills, its chimneys puffing gentle gray clouds into the cold sky. They quickened their pace, careful not to slip, eager to find warmth and perhaps a cup of something hot. When they reached the village, they were greeted with curiosity by the few villagers braving the cold. Amara explained their situation briefly, and an elderly woman nodded knowingly. "You've had a rough night," she said. "Come warm yourselves by the fire." Inside the small inn, the warmth was immediate and comforting. Amara and Elias removed their coats and gloves, feeling the chill slowly leave their bones. The innkeeper brought hot tea, and they sat near the fire, savoring the simple pleasure of heat and rest. Over tea, Amara mentioned the night in the shed, careful to describe it as a shared survival experience. The villagers listened, intrigued but respectful. Some exchanged glances, and she realized they might know more than she did about the traditions of her culture. She had grown up hearing stories of sacred laws and customs, but had never imagined they could apply to a stranger like Elias. Elias listened silently, sipping his tea, and watched Amara carefully. He had no reason to believe in ancient traditions, yet he sensed the importance of what she was saying. There was a depth to her words, a seriousness that made him pause. He respected her not just for surviving the storm, but for carrying the weight of her beliefs with quiet dignity. As the morning turned to afternoon, Amara and Elias prepared to continue their journey. The snow had slowed, leaving a soft blanket over the road. They walked side by side, each step careful but steady. Conversation returned naturally, flowing from small observations about the village to more personal stories. Amara found herself sharing details she had never told anyone, her dreams, her fears, and the pressure she often felt to follow the expectations of her family and community. Elias listened without judgment, offering thoughtful comments but never interrupting. There was a sense of ease between them now, a trust that had grown from shared hardship and mutual respect. At one point, they stopped at a frozen stream to rest. Elias knelt and broke the ice to give them both a drink, showing a practical skill that impressed Amara. She laughed softly at his careful handling of the ice, and he smiled back, a small, rare gesture that revealed a gentler side beneath his rugged exterior. "You've lived through a lot, haven't you?" Amara asked quietly, watching the water flow. Elias nodded. "Life doesn't always wait for comfort. You learn to move with it or get left behind." She thought about the storm, the shed, and the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "I guess we both learned that last night," she said, her voice reflective. Their journey continued, and as they walked, Amara noticed small things about Elias she hadn't seen before. The way he observed the environment, the careful steps he took to avoid danger, the patience he showed when helping her over rough patches. Each detail deepened her understanding of him, and she realized that their connection was more than just survival. By evening, they reached the edge of a forest near the town she had intended to reach. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, the setting sun reflecting off the snow. Amara felt a wave of gratitude, not just for the shelter they had shared, but for the companionship that had formed between them. Elias walked beside her, silent but present, and she knew that the night in the shed was only the beginning of something significant. As they approached a small bridge leading into town, Amara paused. "Thank you," she said softly, "for last night and for today. I don't know what I would have done without you." Elias nodded, his expression serious but not unkind. "We survived together, that's what matters." For a moment they simply looked at each other, the snow falling gently around them, the world quiet except for the faint sound of the stream below. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. When they finally crossed the bridge, the lights of the town twinkled ahead, welcoming them from the harsh wilderness. They entered together, stepping from the cold into warmth, from uncertainty into safety. And though neither fully realized it yet, the bond formed in the storm and strengthened during the day's journey was growing into something neither could ignore. By nightfall, they found themselves in a small guest house. Exhausted but safe, they settled in separate rooms, each reflecting on the events of the past day. Amara thought about Elias, his quiet strength, his patience, and the way he had made the ordeal bearable. Elias, in turn, thought about Amara, her courage, her kindness, and the way she had faced danger with determination rather than fear. As they drifted to sleep, both knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. The storm had brought them together, but it was the trust, respect, and subtle connection that would keep them linked. And while neither could yet predict the challenges or revelations ahead, the memory of shared survival and the comfort of companionship would linger, quietly shaping the next chapter of their story. The next morning, Amara woke to the faint sound of birds chirping outside the window, a gentle contrast to the harsh blizzard from which she and Elias had narrowly escaped. The snow had mostly melted from the town, leaving small patches that glistened in the early sunlight. She stretched and took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The night in the guest house had been quiet, but her mind was full of questions. She wondered about Elias. Last night, they had shared meals and exchanged polite conversation, yet neither had mentioned what had happened in the shed beyond survival. Something lingered in the air between them, an unspoken connection that neither fully understood. Amara felt an odd mix of curiosity and nervousness. She wanted to speak to him, to understand him better, but she also feared disrupting the fragile bond that had begun to form. Downstairs, she found Elias already awake, staring out of the window at the snow-covered streets. The morning light highlighted his features in a way that made him seem more approachable, less guarded than he had been during the storm. He turned as she entered, giving a small nod and a faint smile. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. "Sleep well." "Yes, thank you, and you," he shrugged lightly. "Enough, couldn't sleep too long anyway, too many thoughts." Amara understood. There were things left unsaid, questions left unanswered, and a strange uncertainty about what their connection meant. She poured them both tea, and they sat by the window, watching the town slowly come to life. The warmth of the sun streaming in through the glass made the room feel safe and calm, but the events of the previous days still weighed heavily in their minds. After breakfast, Amara decided to visit the local market to gather supplies for the journey back home. Elias accompanied her, walking beside her quietly. The town was small, cozy, and welcoming. People greeted them politely, though they noticed the slight awkwardness between the two travelers. Amara felt their curious eyes but ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. As they moved through the market, she bought fresh bread, cheese, and a few other essentials, thinking ahead to their next day of travel. Elias carried the heavier items without complaint, a quiet strength that impressed her. She realized that survival skills weren't just about facing storms, they were also about endurance, patience, and thoughtfulness. Elias seemed to possess all of these qualities naturally, without needing to show off or draw attention to himself. When their shopping was complete, they returned to the guest house. Amara felt a sudden need to speak about the night in the shed, about the bond they had unknowingly formed. She hesitated, unsure how to start, but knew she couldn't leave without addressing it. "Elias," she began carefully, "there's something I should tell you about what happened in the shelter." He looked at her, curious but calm. "What is it?" Amara took a deep breath. She explained the tradition from her village, the sacred law that dictated that anyone who shared life-saving shelter during extreme conditions was considered bound in a form of partnership. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, aware that he had no knowledge of this law. Elias listened without interrupting, though his expression shifted from curiosity to mild disbelief. "You mean we're bound?" he asked cautiously. Amara nodded. "According to my culture, yes. I didn't know it would happen either, but the elders said it's a rule that cannot be ignored. Sharing shelter in life-threatening conditions creates a bond that is recognized by our community." Elias paused, taking a moment to process the information. He had never been one to follow rituals or ancient rules blindly, but he respected the seriousness in Amara's voice. "I see," he said finally. "I didn't know this existed. I just thought we survived the storm together." "I didn't realize there was more to it." "I didn't either," Amara admitted, "but now that I know, I have to respect it, and I need to know if you can, too." Elias looked away for a moment, considering. The wind outside rustled the trees, a gentle reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. He thought about the night in the shed, the quiet trust that had grown, the way he had felt responsible for Amara without question. He realized that the bond, whether by tradition or by circumstance, had already begun to influence his thoughts. "I think I can," he said finally, his voice steady but thoughtful. "Not because of rules or laws, but because I want to protect you." That night made me realize that. Amara felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." For the rest of the day, they stayed in the town, preparing for the journey home. As they walked through the streets, the connection between them felt different now, more defined, more significant. They spoke openly about the path ahead, sharing concerns about the weather, the roads, and the possibility of encountering further obstacles. Planning together strengthened their partnership, turning shared survival into shared responsibility. Later in the afternoon, an elder from the town approached them. She had overheard parts of their conversation and offered guidance. "You have experienced something rare," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This bond is not just a rule, it is a recognition of trust, respect, and care. If both of you honor it, it will guide your future in ways you cannot yet imagine." Amara and Elias listened carefully. The words resonated, adding weight to the situation. This wasn't just about surviving a storm. It was about acknowledging the deeper connection that had formed in the most challenging circumstances. As evening approached, they walked to the edge of the town where the main road continued toward Amara's home. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, the sunlight reflecting off the snow in a dazzling display. They paused to admire the view, a quiet moment of peace before returning to the realities of travel. Elias spoke first. "You know, I never expected something like this to happen. I didn't think sharing a night in a shed could matter so much." Amara smiled softly. "Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes the smallest things create the biggest changes." They continued walking, and the silence that followed was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding rather than awkwardness. Both felt the significance of the bond that had been placed upon them, yet neither rushed to define it further. They simply walked side by side, letting the journey itself strengthen their connection. During the walk, they encountered a small challenge, a fallen tree blocking part of the road. Elias stepped forward instinctively, testing the snow around it and finding a safe path. Amara followed closely, trusting his judgment completely. The obstacle was minor, but it reinforced their reliance on each other, the way partnership grows naturally when people face challenges together. By the time night fell, they reached a safe resting point at a small inn outside the town. They were tired but satisfied, knowing they had navigated the day successfully. The room was modest, with 2 separate beds, but the warmth and shelter felt luxurious compared to the cold of the storm. As they settled in, Amara reflected on the events of the day. The revelation of the sacred law had added a new layer to their connection, one that neither of them could ignore. Yet, beneath the rules and traditions, she felt something simpler and more profound: trust, care, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Elias, on the other hand, considered his own feelings. He had entered the storm thinking he would survive alone, and yet he had found himself profoundly affected by the presence of another person. He realized that the bond Amara spoke of was already present in his heart, not because of law, but because of the shared experience, the respect, and the trust that had grown naturally between them. As they prepared to sleep, both felt the weight of the day's revelations. They were bound by tradition, yes, but more importantly, they were bound by experience, understanding, and mutual care. The night in the shed, the journey through snow, and the conversations of the day had laid a foundation that neither could ignore. Before closing her eyes, Amara whispered a quiet thought to herself, almost like a promise. "Whatever happens, I will honor this bond and I will protect it." Elias, lying on the other bed, thought similarly. "I don't fully understand it yet, but I know I want to be there, to support, to protect, and to walk this path with her." Outside, the wind whispered gently, carrying the faint scent of snow and pine. The world was calm now, but the story of Amara and Elias was far from over. The bond had been revealed, the connection acknowledged, and the journey toward understanding and acceptance had only just begun. The following morning, the sky was pale, and the air was crisp but not harsh. Amara woke early, her mind restless. The previous days had been full of events that neither she nor Elias could have anticipated. She had survived a blizzard, discovered an unexpected bond with a stranger, and now walked alongside him toward her home. carrying not only physical supplies but the weight of a newfound responsibility. Elias, already awake, was sitting by the window, quietly watching the early light play across the snowy fields. He looked calm, almost contemplative. Amara watched him for a moment, noticing the way the sunlight caught the edge of his coat, highlighting the subtle lines of his face. There was something steady about him, a quiet strength that had been evident since the night in the shed, but it felt even more present now. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, turning toward her with a faint smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, though my mind is busy, so many things to think about," she admitted. Elias nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. He too had been thinking. That night in the shed had been just the beginning. The sacred law Amara had mentioned weighed heavily on both of their minds. It was not a simple matter of survival. It carried implications neither had fully grasped yet. They began packing their things and preparing to continue the journey. The road ahead was long, but it was safer than the wilderness they had crossed before. Each step was deliberate, measured against the lingering snow and occasional patches of ice. Despite the morning calm, both were aware of the fragility of their situation. Nature had tested them once, and it could easily do so again. As they walked, Amara found the courage to speak about the sacred law again, feeling the need to ensure Elias truly understood its significance. "Elias," she began carefully, "about the bond, it's more than just a rule. It's a recognition of trust, care, and respect. If we ignore it, it would be seen as dishonoring my community and the tradition itself." Elias listened silently, processing her words. He had always valued reason over ritual, practicality over tradition. Yet he could see the importance of this law to Amara and her people. More than that, he could feel the truth in what she said. The bond that had begun during the storm was already present, regardless of the law. The tradition simply gave it a name. "I understand," he said finally. "I may not fully grasp everything yet, but I see that it matters to you, and I want to honor that." Amara felt a wave of relief, mixed with a quiet hope. Their journey was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding, acceptance, and the deepening of a connection neither could deny. As the day progressed, they continued their trek, navigating through forests and across frozen streams. Along the way, they encountered small challenges. A fallen tree here, a slippery slope there, but each obstacle only strengthened their partnership. Elias instinctively guided Amara, ensuring her safety, while she offered support in other ways, like steadying him across unstable ground or carrying supplies together. Their conversations grew more personal as well. Amara spoke about her family, her childhood, and the values she had grown up with. She explained the importance of tradition, community, and trust. Elias, in turn, shared stories of his past travels, the lessons he had learned from living in unpredictable environments, and the quiet ways he had learned to rely on both himself and the kindness of strangers. It was during a brief rest beside a small river that Elias spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You know, I didn't believe in these kinds of laws or customs before, but now I feel their meaning. It's not about rules, it's about recognizing a bond that's already there." The storm, the shelter, it changed things. I feel it too. Amara looked at him, seeing sincerity in his eyes. "That's all I needed to hear. The law may have given us a name, but the truth of the bond comes from what we've experienced, not just what tradition dictates." By mid-afternoon, they reached a small clearing overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, with snow-capped trees stretching as far as the eye could see. They paused to rest and admire the scenery. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding rather than the need for words. As they sat, Amara noticed a subtle change in Elias. He seemed more open, more relaxed, and yet there was a depth to his gaze that suggested he was still thinking carefully about the sacred law and its implications. She realized that while they had accepted the bond, the true test would come when they faced the opinions of others, especially her community. "Elias," she began, hesitant but determined, "when we reach my village, it won't be simple. People will expect certain things. I don't want to force you into anything, but I need you to understand that this bond, it has meaning beyond us." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand, and I don't feel forced. If anything, I feel responsible, not just for you, but for the bond itself. Whatever it is meant to be, I'll respect it." Their journey continued as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The shadows grew long, and the air cooled, reminding them of the challenges that lay ahead. They found a small cabin in the woods, abandoned but sturdy, where they could spend the night. Inside, they built a small fire and settled near it, the warmth a welcome comfort against the cold outside. As they rested, Amara reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. She had gone from a night of fear and uncertainty in a blizzard to a journey filled with companionship, understanding, and the beginnings of trust. Elias had become more than a stranger. He was a partner in survival, in conversation, and in the acknowledgement of something larger than themselves. Elias, lying back on a makeshift bed of blankets, thought about the sacred law and its role in their lives. He had faced countless challenges before, but none had felt as significant as this. The law had given form to the connection he felt, but the true bond came from shared experiences, trust, and the realization that he and Amara had already become part of each other's lives. As night fell, the cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional gust of wind outside. Amara and Elias sat together, talking softly about small things, the patterns of the stars, the distant sounds of wildlife, and the simple beauty of the world around them. Their words were calm, reflective, and filled with a sense of companionship that had grown from necessity into something deeper. Before sleep claimed them, Amara turned to Elias. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "So am I. I didn't expect to be, but I'm glad. Whatever comes next, I'll face it with you." And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by snow and silence, the bond between them became clearer. It was no longer just about tradition or survival. It was about trust, understanding, and the choice to care for one another. The sacred law had revealed what was already there, and now they both knew that the next steps would shape not only their journey home, but the future of their lives together. Outside, the world was still, blanketed in snow and quiet under the pale light of the moon. Inside, two people who had once been strangers sat together, their hearts connected by experiences, respect, and the knowledge that they were no longer alone. The challenges of the days ahead would test them further, but they had discovered something far more powerful than fear, the quiet strength of a bond formed in trust and shared hardship. As they drifted to sleep, each felt a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and perhaps the ultimate test of the bond that had begun in a storm and strengthened with every step of their journey. And though neither knew exactly what lay ahead, they both understood that the connection they had formed was unbreakable, not because it was demanded by law, but because it had grown naturally from courage, care, and shared experience. The next morning, the first light of dawn streamed through the cabin windows, casting a gentle glow over the blankets and the simple belongings they had gathered. Amara woke slowly, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Today, they would reach her village, the place that had always been home, but now held the weight of something unfamiliar and significant. She glanced at Elias, who was already awake, gazing thoughtfully at the snow-covered fields outside. "Morning," she said softly, trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her chest. "Morning," he replied with a small smile. "Are you ready?" Amara nodded. She felt ready in one sense. They had survived storms, navigated challenges, and discovered a bond neither of them had expected. But in another sense, she felt anxious. The villagers would know of the sacred law, and they would expect recognition of the bond between her and Elias. How would he react to the full implications of it? Would he accept the customs of her people as fully as he had accepted the experiences that had brought them together? They packed their belongings carefully, making sure nothing was left behind. The cabin, simple and warm for the brief time they had stayed, had become a place of reflection, a pause between the trials of the storm and the challenges that awaited them in the village. Elias helped Amara with her pack, his movements deliberate and considerate, a reminder of the care that had grown naturally between them. The journey from the cabin to the village was longer than expected, but the sun climbed steadily in the sky, bringing warmth to the crisp winter air. Their conversation was quiet but meaningful. Amara spoke of the people in the village, the customs, and the expectations they would face. Elias listened carefully, asking questions at the right moments, showing interest and respect. "You know," he said at one point, "I've faced a lot of dangerous situations before, but none like this. I didn't expect to feel so connected to someone I barely knew." Amara smiled softly. I felt the same way that night. I didn't know who you were, but I trusted you, and I realized that sometimes trust comes from experience, not just familiarity. Elias nodded, and for a moment they walked in companionable silence, the crunch of snow beneath their boots the only sound. The bond between them felt solid, strengthened not only by survival but by shared understanding and mutual care. As the village came into view, Amara's heart began to race. The familiar houses, the narrow streets, and the faces of neighbors brought a sense of home, but also the weight of tradition. She led Elias to the center of the village, where elders and family members had gathered. Their eyes watched carefully, waiting for the story of the storm and the bond that had been formed. Amara stepped forward and spoke, her voice clear and steady. She recounted the events of the blizzard, the shelter, and the moments of survival she had shared with Elias. She explained the sacred law, its significance, and the recognition of the bond that now existed between them. The villagers listened attentively, nodding and murmuring as the story unfolded. Elias stood beside her, feeling the eyes upon him but trusting Amara to guide the situation. The elders approached, their expressions serious yet kind. One of them, a woman with gentle eyes and a calm presence, spoke first. "You have shared shelter and survival in a time of great danger," she said. "By our sacred law, you are recognized as bonded. This is not a rule of force, but of acknowledgement, a recognition of the trust, care, and respect you have shown each other." Elias took a deep breath. He had anticipated some form of ceremony, some acknowledgement of tradition, but hearing the words aloud made the bond feel real in a new way. He turned to Amara, seeing in her eyes a mixture of relief, hope, and quiet joy. In that moment, he understood fully what the bond meant, not as an obligation, but as a commitment rooted in experience and choice. "I accept," he said clearly, his voice steady. "Not because I have to, but because I want to. I respect this law and I respect you. This bond, it is real to me." Amara felt her heart lift at his words. Relief and happiness washed over her. She had worried about whether Elias would understand, whether he would respect the traditions that were so important to her people. But now, standing together in front of the village, she knew that their connection was not only acknowledged but mutual. The elders nodded in approval, and the villagers began to offer warm smiles and congratulations. It was a celebration not of ceremony alone, but of survival, courage, and the recognition of a partnership that had grown naturally. Amara and Elias walked together through the village streets, feeling the warmth of acceptance and the quiet joy of companionship. As the day progressed, they shared stories with the villagers, who were curious about the blizzard, the shed, and the events that had brought them together. Amara's family embraced her, relieved and proud, and they welcomed Elias as part of their community. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of unity that made the day feel magical. Later, as the sun began to set, Amara and Elias found a quiet spot by a frozen river on the edge of the village. The water reflected the colors of the sky, soft shades of orange and pink blending with the crisp winter light. They sat together, the cold forgotten in the warmth of understanding and shared experience. "You know," Elias said softly, "I never imagined something like this could happen. I never expected to feel so connected to someone in such a short time." Amara smiled, reaching out to touch his hand lightly. "Neither did I. But sometimes life surprises us in ways we don't expect. That storm that night, it changed everything, not because of law or tradition, but because we faced it together." Elias nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I feel the same. And now, standing here, I realize that this bond, it's not just about the law, it's about us, about trust, respect, and care, and I want to honor it every day." The moment was quiet, peaceful, and full of meaning. The challenges of the past, the storm, the cold, the uncertainty, had led them to this point. The bond they shared was no longer abstract or ceremonial. It was real, lived, and mutual. As night fell, they returned to the village together, the lights from the houses casting a warm glow on the snow. The villagers had prepared a small feast in their honor, a simple celebration of survival, trust, and the recognition of a meaningful bond. Amara and Elias shared the meal, laughing and talking with the people around them, feeling fully accepted and connected. After the festivities, Amara and Elias walked through the quiet streets, the cold night air filled with the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. They spoke softly about the days ahead, the journey home, and the new life they were beginning together. Each word, each glance, reinforced the connection that had begun in the storm and had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced. When they reached the edge of the village, they paused, looking out over the fields and forests beyond. The world was calm, blanketed in snow, but it was no longer threatening. It was full of possibilities, of future journeys, and of the shared experiences that had brought them together. Elias turned to Amara, his eyes reflecting the soft moonlight. "Whatever comes next," he said, "I'll face it with you. Not because of law or tradition, but because I choose to." Amara smiled, her heart full. "And I'll face it with you too, together." In that moment, the bond between them was complete, not defined only by sacred law, not only by survival, but by the choices they had made, the trust they had built, and the care they felt for each other. The storm that had brought them together was now behind them, and the future stretched ahead, filled with hope, partnership, and the quiet joy of companionship. As they walked back into the village, side by side, the snow reflecting the soft light of the evening, both knew that life had changed forever. They had found something rare and precious, not just survival, but connection, understanding, and a bond that would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, the story of Amara and Elias, which had begun in a small, cold shelter during a blizzard, reached a joyful and meaningful conclusion. Their bond, once uncertain and unknown, was now clear, accepted, and celebrated. Together, they had turned a night of fear and hardship into a journey of trust, care, and lasting partnership.